on we're going to have a lesson on prepositional phrases and then also a lesson on relevance statements and conclusions. So how you argue that your essays like matter. And then we'll do a little bit of discussion about the next book you guys are going to be reading, and that'll take us right to the end of class. I'm a little sick, so my voice may sound just a little bit off and I may have to stop if I'm talking for a long time. So we're going to try and keep the class pretty lighthearted and also participation pretty high, so I don't have to just lecture at you guys the whole time. But anyway, let's get started with an icebreaker activity for the week. We're going to do something that's just a slight variation on our usual icebreaker. Oh, Lucian, yeah, feel free to leave your camera off then, no worries. All right, so the question is, rate your week from a 1 to a 5 and share one new thing that you learned over the course of the week. So I guess I'll get us started. My week was probably, despite being sick right now, my week was probably about a 4 since we had break. Yale has a couple of days off in October where you don't have to go to class. So that's been nice. I've been using that time to work on my thesis and apply to jobs, and I've been pretty productive, which is nice. Although today I've just been taken out with an unfortunate cold. But yeah, so I'd rate my week like a 4. And then one new thing I learned this week is that I learned that Oxford University in the United Kingdom is 200 years older than the Inca Empire, which is crazy. I didn't know that. I would have thought the Incas were a lot further ago. I think they're also after. I'm trying to remember that. Yeah, I just didn't realize that Oxford was so old, and then also that the Inca Empire was so recent. Yeah, so that's what I learned in school this week. Let's go to Constance. How's your week been? 1 to a 5.
It's been like 3. Nothing really interesting happened, but we didn't have school on Monday because schools in California are now required to give you 1 day per month off.
Oh, cool. So like no holiday, not like just that.
Yeah, because I don't think there's any holidays in October.
I think Indigenous Peoples Day is this month, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm glad you got the day off. What's one? Did you learn anything interesting this week?
Not really.
Okay, super fair. I'm glad your week's been okay. Let's go to Perry next, if you could. Barry, this is also serving as tech check, so just like make sure that your audio is working and also you can hear me. So please respond if you can. That way I can mark you as present. Otherwise I cannot. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you're cutting in and out.
Okay. What was the question?
Sure. The question is, rate your week from a 1 to a 5 and share one new thing that you learned.
I guess my week was like 3 to 4. One new fact I learned. Actually, I'm not sure.
Okay, well, if you think of something, please put it in the chat just for participation's sake. But thank you. Good to hear from you, Perry. Glad your week's been pretty good. Let's go to Andrew. How's your week been?
Nothing exciting happened, so it's a 3. And something I learned was that during Prohibition, there were these Prohibition agents who were supposed to make sure that people weren't making alcohol in their own houses. And one Prohibition agent went around the country to see which city he would be offered illegal booze first and how fast it took for the city to offer him booze. And the record was New Orleans, where he was offered alcohol in 32 seconds.
That's actually really funny, Andrew, because I spent the summer working in New Orleans and actually learned a little bit about the history of Prohibition down there, and that they used to the people who were illegally making alcohol used to go into the swamps and like make it in these distilleries that they'd set up and then like sneak it or smuggle it into the city. So that's interesting just because like historically I'm interested in the city, but that's funny. That makes a lot of sense. New Orleans has this reputation of being this sort of like lawless place in which there's a lot of just like, I don't know, a lot going on. But yeah, that's an interesting fun fact. Glad your week has been decent, if a little bit uninteresting. Darren, how's your week been from a 1 to a 5?
It's been like a 4 because I went to Irvine with my basketball teammates for a tournament and we got to hang out after the games. And then one thing I learned was how to say the time in Spanish at school.
Oh yeah, I don't know if my Spanish serves, but it's son las.
Yeah, it's that.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. Great. Did you guys win the basketball tournament? How'd that go?
No, we didn't win.
Okay, well, glad it was still fun to like get to see your teammates and hang out. Yeah, and it's always fun to learn new vocab in a different language. I also took Spanish in high school and in college. So yeah, great. Good to hear from you, Darren. Glad to have you in class. Tiger, how's your week been? 1 to a 5.
My week has been a 4. Nothing really exciting happened. I don't think I learned anything.
Nothing at all.
Nothing.
Okay, well, hopefully you'll learn something in class today then. If anything comes to mind, feel free to put it in the chat. Isabella C, how's your week been from a 1 to a 5?
My week was a 4, and I learned about info zones in social studies class.
Huh. What is an info zone? I'm unfamiliar.
It's just like 6 different types of information.
Okay, yeah, that sounds super useful. Social studies classes are always really engaging. Yeah, great to hear from you, Isabella. Lucy, and how's your week been from a 1 to a 5?
I think I never said that my week had been a 1 before because I stayed in hospital for a week and I had an accident last Friday. So, but it's happy that today I can get out of hospital, and something I learned was kind of like some higher chemistry.
Okay, yeah. I hope that everything's going okay. I'm sorry that you've had such a difficult week, and obviously, if you need to just like drop out of class for any, or like turn your camera off or leave class for any reason, don't hesitate. But glad that you could make it. All things considered, happy to have you in class, Lucy, and hope you're feeling better soon. And then I think Eric, you're our last person. How's your week been?
My week's been like a 4. It's been pretty normal. And one thing I learned, I don't really think I learned any.
Okay, super fair. If you think of something, put it in the chat. But yeah, great. Good to hear from everybody. It sounds like we've had a wide spectrum of uninteresting to very difficult to kind of fun weeks. Hopefully this class isn't going to be too difficult or too academic. I'm going to try and keep our grammar lesson pretty short. But we're also going to talk about, the essays from last week and then how to write a really good, really compelling conclusion statement. So with that being said, let's open the floor and talk a little bit about these essays from last week, because I know the prompt was sort of challenging. It was different than what a lot of the prompts that you've had for similar essays. Was there anything particular that you guys struggled with, or also any like strategies that you guys had to sort of combine internal text evidence with external sources? I was really happy with how these essays turned out, but I also think that this is sort of a challenging topic. So yeah, any difficulties that you guys encountered while writing this essay? Let's start there. Andrew, what do you got?
I found that the book barely talked about the state of the world then, and it really only talked about the characters' feelings, emotions, and their current situation, as in the characters themselves, not the bigger world around them, which then I found it really hard to write the essay because my main point relied on the current events that were happening.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. So that's a big issue that I think a lot of students ran into. There's not a ton of evidence about what the world is like at the time. Now there is some, like, the intro starts off with a description of where they're living, and that talks about poverty. We know that the main character is saving up money and that they're not a particularly wealthy or well-off family. But yeah, so it might be useful, or it might have been useful for some students to write also about the sort of social expectations of the American dream, since a lot of the play focuses on the social relationship between the family, where it's like, you know, the expectation of gentleman callers or raising a family or, you know, providing for your like mother and sister. And that's also a component of the American dream. And I think you can even see it through like Tom working in a factory and wanting to be a poet and having these dreams. Like there are, but you're right that a lot of the content that deals with the American dream is more in subtext than it is in just like direct text about the state of the world. And that's why it's good that students did some outside research to sort of get a better understanding of the context in which the play is like happening in. But yeah, I think you're right. That's sort of one frustration that I imagine students having. Anything else that presented as a challenge? Because I also know we haven't gone over, I mean, in other classes, we've talked about how to do external research and like what it means to sort of have good credible sources, but we haven't talked about that in this class. I was really happy with how everyone did, except I'll remind you guys, if you're ever writing an essay that has more than one text being discussed, you want a bibliography of some kind. Some students would just like copy and paste citations like directly into the text, which doesn't look so good. It's not as clear. It's not easy to read. It's always better if you just have a bibliography at the end. I didn't dock points off necessarily for like missing a bibliography. And also I don't have particular preferences for whatever style of citations you guys learn. What I will say is Chicago is the best. Chicago is the style of citations you'll use almost exclusively in college. So if you want to learn something early, Chicago citations are pretty easy. But yeah, you should have in-text citations and also a bibliography if you're writing about more than one source. So that was one thing that a lot of students were missing. But okay, if nobody had any other sort of like outstanding difficulties, I'll just go through some general feedback that I had. So first, I think the prompt is difficult, and we talked about this last week, but it's important to discuss the difference between what is an illusion and how an illusion can be accurate or inaccurate. So first, it's just like a reminder, what does it mean for an author to allude to something? Tiger, do you remember?
It's like to I forgot.
Yeah, no worries. It's been a couple weeks. Isabella, do you remember by any chance what an illusion is?
Like a reference or like an indirect reference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's a reference. And what kind of things can we be referencing? How do we decide what is sort of fair game as an illusion? Constance, what do you think?
I think it's like a reference to something like famous.
Yeah, famous, something that's just like there's a broad sort of cultural understanding of. So like the Bible or Greek mythology or yeah, big ideas like the American dream are all sorts of things that you can make allusions to, and you understand that your author has like some understanding of what those concepts are to begin with. So, but it's also important that an illusion is also usually saying something about them, and it's not always positive. So like the allusion in The Glass Menagerie to the American dream is the idea that the American dream has been a failure, right? That it's not attainable for most people, for most like working class families in the 1930s. That's what Tennessee Williams is saying about the American dream. The question then becomes, is this accurate or inaccurate? And I think a lot of students got tripped up here and sort of thought, oh, if Tennessee Williams is saying the American dream is a failure, he is inaccurately alluding to the American dream, which is not true. That second part of the question is asking you guys to analyze whether or not Tennessee Williams saying that the American dream at that point in time is unattainable is accurate or not. It's whether or not his allusion is accurate or not whether or not his allusion is like in support of or against the idea of the American dream. So that's, I think, where a lot of students got confused. And I know that the prompt is worded a little bit strangely, but I think most students answered this quite well. It's just important to remember that an allusion doesn't have to be overwhelmingly positive. An allusion can be making commentary on the thing that it's referencing. You can allude to the idea that the American dream has been a failure, and then you as students are tasked with analyzing whether or not that's accurate. Okay, so hopefully that helps explain just sort of the weird wording of the prompt. And then I have a couple of general skills to remember. So first, work on strong, confident wording. We talked about this last class, but especially in your thesis statements, you don't want to have phrases that are like some people might think that there is a chance that, and then you go into your thesis, because that sounds like you doubt your own thesis. Like your thesis can have a lot of nuance and qualifications. It can be specific. You can say this thing is true in this context, but not in this context. But your thesis is your argument. You never want to say like, oh, it might be true, or I think it's true that like this is the thesis. No, you want to be very, very emphatically arguing whatever your thesis statement is. Then secondly, you want to avoid passive tense wherever possible. We talked about this last week. Can anyone explain quickly the difference between passive and active tense? Does anyone remember simply what it is? It may be a little tricky, but active tense is when the subject of the sentence is doing something. So I walked the dog. The action is being done, like the action is being done by someone. I walked the dog. He went to the car. He drove across the road. She went to the store. Those are all active tense. Passive tense is where something is being done to the subject of the sentence. So it's like the dog was walked by me, or the game was won by the team, rather than the team won the game. The difference is subtle, but it does really change the way in which a sentence is characterized. The first tense, active tense, calls attention to the fact that the subject is an actor doing a thing, whereas passive tense just sort of implies that something happened and that the actor was the way in which the thing happened, but is ultimately less important. So when you're writing, passive tense isn't always incorrect, but a lot of times you want to switch a good portion of your sentences to be active wherever possible, because it makes your writing first shorter, second more concise, and just you sound a lot more convicted in what you're saying. All right. My final piece of feedback was to remember to analyze every piece of evidence you include. This was like a particularly pervasive issue in a lot of student submissions where students would have direct text evidence followed by evidence about the state of America in the 1930s outside of the book, and then a little bit of analysis on that last piece of evidence. But you want to make sure you're analyzing both pieces of evidence, and you need to somehow talk about them in combination with one another, which is a really tricky skill that I think you have to develop as a writer. So don't worry if this was tricky. If you felt a little out of your depth, you'll definitely feel better later. So I think body paragraphs are going to be the best way to show some of these issues. So let's read through a couple of body paragraphs from students' essays. I chose really good ones, and we'll talk about what we like, and then also what we think could use just sort of a little bit of structural work. So let's start here. Can somebody read this one for me? I will accept volunteers. Lucian, go for it.
First of all, William views the economic problems that the Wingfield family had and relates it to the crashing economy in the 1930s. In the play, Tom is the only one working to support the family, while the family makes some financial blunders. $50 tuition, all of our plans. My hopes and ambition for you just gone up the spout like that. Tom only makes $65 a month, meaning their family just lost more than 75% of their monthly earnings. During the Great Depression, the US economy shrank by a third, from the beginning to the bottom 4 years later. For this reason, the play relates to the American dream because of the economic failure.
Okay, so how do we feel about this body paragraph? Things that the author does well, things that maybe could be improved. Just initial thoughts. Andrew, what do you think?
There isn't really too much of an analysis here.
I agree. I think we could use maybe one more sentence about analysis. And I don't know, Andrew, do you have suggestions of what we'd say in that sentence, or just we need some more analysis?
I would say I would just talk about how even in this they lost so much money, and in this time money is especially important. Something like that.
I think you're right. I think both pieces of evidence are really good, but we need a reason why we put them together. So like we have this quote from Tom talking about how much money they've lost. And then we have a piece of information about the Great Depression saying that the economy shrank by a third. And maybe we need to explain what that means. So like when the economy shrinks, families have less income, causing money to be a much more important consideration, which explains some of why Tom is so frustrated with the amount of money he's losing from his income. Like, just some way to bridge the gap between this sort of internal text and then the external evidence that we have. Yeah, I think that's one issue. Anything else come to mind here? Constance, what do you think?
This isn't like anything to do with the paragraph. I think the quote is from Amanda.
Yeah, that's true too. I think it would be a little bit clearer if we maybe mentioned that Amanda is the one talking. So Tom is the only one working to support the family while the family makes some financial blunders. And then you're right, by just dropping the quote right in here, it sort of implies that Tom is saying it, even though it's Amanda. So you could say, like, in the fight between Tom and his mother, Amanda says the following or whatever, just introducing this quote. Also, even just a semicolon here would make it a little bit, or a colon would make it a little bit easier to understand that, like, this, right, you know, the way it was originally, this quote is just its own sentence without any analysis or without any intro. So yeah, just finding a way to maybe like introduce the quote would be better. But yeah, other than that, I think this is a really excellent example of like structure and content. We have a really nice transition sentence into our topic sentence. We have a great little conclusion down here. We have evidence, we have analysis. All of the components are definitely in this paragraph. There's just a little bit of like structural things to fix. This was a great submission. Yeah. All right, let's read this second one, which is a little longer. Can I get a volunteer to read this? Eric, go for it.
After describing the character of Tom, the author illustrates another character, Laura, who similarly to Tom fails to follow her aspirations due to the environment she lives in, hence contradicting the American dream. Laura is used by the author to represent a person so lost in a situation that they do not know what to do with their life. The author depicts this issue in Laura as she is overwhelmed within the struggle among her family, between Tom and Amanda, and the situation Laura's family is left in, that she is unable to think of a future for herself. In the scene where Amanda questions Laura about what she does instead of going to business school, the author narrates what Laura responds as, "I've been going on walks. I went in the art museum and the birdhouses at the zoo." Page 15. The way Laura is portrayed through this example shows how lost she is based on how she doesn't know what to do with her life. Through this example, the author indicates that Laura is in this clueless situation because the environment she grew up in never taught her what to do. Another instance is after Amanda and Tom argue over Tom's lifestyle, and Laura is left in the room with Tom. The author narrates that Laura cries out as if wounded after the collection of glass menageries are broken. This example shows how fragile Laura is and how her emotional stability depends on the environment around her. Laura is so disoriented by the conflict between Tom and Amanda that her only source of consolation is the set of glass menageries, which she relies too heavily on. As shown throughout these examples, the author depicts Laura's unstable life as being the effect of her environment, which hence heavily goes against the ideal of the American dream.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Eric, because this is a long paragraph. What do people have in terms of initial reactions here? What do we think the author does well? What could maybe be slightly improved? Isabella C., what do you think? Oh, I think she's Wi-Fi issues, unfortunately. Okay, great. Darren, what do you think? Initial reactions to this paragraph?
Well, I think that like the analysis after the quotes like is really good, and that we can sort of understand the quote a lot better and like what it means.
I'll agree with that. I think the analysis is definitely the strongest part of this paragraph. Anything that that we think the author should maybe fix or work on, construct pieces of constructive criticism. I would say I think this paragraph is really excellent. It just, or yeah, Eric, what do you think?
I feel like the person repeats some analysis.
I agree. I think our paragraph is bordering on being too long, right? Like if there was a difference between the analysis here and the analysis later on, we might want to break it into 2 paragraphs because it's so long. But you're right, the analysis is actually kind of similar between both examples. So maybe finding a way to, just tighten the word count a little bit and take out some of these unnecessary sentences would be good. The other thought I had is I think Darren's right that the analysis here is really great in explaining how Laura is portrayed as lost and like she doesn't know what she's doing, and how her environment has sort of shaped the way in which she's raised is all really good. My only issue is that I think this quote is maybe, there are cases where like your evidence mismatches your analysis a little bit. So this quote is beautifully introduced. We understand why, what context Laura is saying this in. It's after, Amanda has asked her about what she does instead of going to business school. And she says, oh, I go on walks to the art museum and to the birdhouses at the zoo. But that in and of itself, I don't think necessarily portrays that Laura is lost and doesn't know how she's going through life. I think maybe we should look back at that page of the argument to find a different quote, just so that the quote is very concretely saying what the analysis is saying. But this is that's a very minor issue. I think ultimately this paragraph is extremely well written and quite strong. So yeah, this may be the issues here is mostly what Eric talked about, just like we might be a little repetitive or overly long, but all of the content is quite strong and the analysis is very good, like Darren said. So yeah, like I said, I picked good examples that I liked quite a bit, but hopefully this is giving you guys just a sense of like, we're now at the point where like structure really matters more than just like the occasional grammar mistake. You guys are such strong writers that I want you guys to get really good at being concise and incisive and not repeating yourself more than I care about like, specific comma rules or whatever, because most people are past that sort of stage of writing. Okay, so let's talk about our grammar lesson for today, which is going to be about prepositions and also prepositional phrases. So is anyone familiar with what a preposition is? You guys have probably heard the word before, at least in grammar classes, but yeah, Lucian, what is a preposition?
It's kind of like a word which names like places and also something like in, on, and at.
Yeah. In, on, at. So those are the examples that Lucian gave. And yeah, prepositions generally, that's exactly true. A preposition is a word that explains, I'm going to use a phrase that's a little bit complicated, but the temporal nature of something, meaning when or where or how something happens. So this may sound a little bit confusing, but you'll understand from examples, I think. So a preposition, a prepositional phrase is a group of words containing a preposition, a noun or pronoun, meaning the object of the preposition, and any modifiers to the object. And so the preposition sits in front of it's prepositioned before the object. So the object is what the sentence is about, and the preposition is usually positioned before. But that may not make a ton of sense to you guys. What I actually think will make sense is looking at examples. So you'll see the list here, about, above, across, after, against, along, beneath, for, from, in, regarding, since, through, throughout. All of these you can see have relations to where something is happening, when it is happening, or the composition of how it is happening. And that may be a little bit confusing, but you'll understand when you look at sentences and you see that like the verb is what's being done to the object. The preposition is how or where or when it's happening. So some examples would be as follows. If you look at the sentence, after several minutes, we located the key for the door. The prepositional phrase here is after several minutes. It has to do with when the action is happening. We located the key is the indirect or the independent clause. That is the thing happening. The subject is we, the verb is located, the object is the key. And then for the door is also a prepositional phrase because it explains something about the nature of what is being done. The key is for the door. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense, but we'll go through one more example and then it maybe will make more sense. So the second sentence reads, the flock of tiny swallows flew over the tree near the lake. The flock flew would be the really basic root independent clause. And then your prepositional phrases are of tiny swallows. That's explaining what the flock is comprised of. So it's a prepositional phrase. And then the flock of tiny swallows flew over the trees and near the lake are both prepositional phrases because they have to do with location. They're about where something is happening. So the words that you should look for are, like after, for, of, over, near. Those are all prepositions. But it's important to not get confused because words like to or for are sometimes prepositions and they're not always prepositions. And we'll explain cases in which they're not. So let's just, oh no, this was supposed to be a quiz and you guys were supposed to be being asked what the prepositional phrases here were. Okay, so firstly, let's start with the first sentence. We drove our car to the store. What is the prepositional phrase here? Constance.
To the store.
Right, pretending that you didn't see what was highlighted before. To the store is the prepositional phrase because it is the location in which the sentence is occurring. We drove our car. Where did we drive our car? To the store. So it's a preposition to, and then followed by a prepositional phrase, the store, to the store. Great. We drove our car is just the basic independent clause. Okay, he ran across the road to catch the bus. What are the prepositional phrases here? Darren.
To catch the bus.
That's one of them. And what's the other one?
Is it across the road?
Yep, those are both prepositional phrases. A little confusing, but both of them have to do with the, where and when and how the action is occurring. He ran is actually an independent clause. That is a sentence in and of itself. It's a two-word sentence. So the modifiers we're adding are across the road, explaining where we're running, and then to catch the bus, explaining why we're running. And both of those are prepositional phrases. Across and to are the prepositions here. Okay, finally, I love to daydream and get lost among the stars. What's the preposition here? This is maybe a bit of a tricky question. Andrew, take a guess. Among
stars.
Yeah, great. So among is the preposition, you're exactly right. And among the stars is the prepositional phrase. Now, here's a real question. Why is to catch the bus a prepositional phrase, but to daydream isn't? They both start with to. What's the difference? So it depends on the role that the word is playing in the sentence, right? I love to daydream. To daydream here is being used as a verb. And so the to here isn't a preposition. I love isn't really a sentence on its own, but I love to daydream is its own sentence. And I love to get lost can also be its own sentence. So both of these aren't considered prepositional phrases. But when we add among the stars, we're adding a location of where we're daydreaming and getting lost. And as a result, that is considered a preposition. So prepositions, like I said before, they relate to like temporal qualities of an action, how, when, why, where it's happening. Okay. So now I'm going to make it really complicated, which is that some words that look like a preposition actually are just part of the verb and are called participles. So sometimes you see a word that is usually a preposition, but in certain cases it's not. And this usually has to do when like a verb takes on an informal meaning, right? So like the verb held up is a great example, saying like, I held up the bank. Up usually is a preposition because it's a temporal, it's a temporal phrase, it's a location. But saying like up the bank doesn't, if I hold up my keys, that's an action where the up is indicating, something about the location of something. But saying you held up the bank, to hold something up is its own noun. It's taken on this like colloquial meaning that you're like robbing a bank. So held up is just the verb, and up in this case is a participle rather than a preposition. And that may be a little bit confusing, but with a couple more examples, I think it will make more sense. So like bank is the direct object, and the verb is held up. Not just held, but held up, because held up means something different than just, you wouldn't say, I held the bank. That doesn't make any sense. So other examples would be like, for instance, he came by the office in a big hurry. In this example, by the office is a preposition, as a prepositional phrase, because it's explaining the location of an action. Where did he come? Oh, he came by the office. Whereas in the second example, he came by his fortune honestly. Saying like, oh, somebody came by a fortune means like the means in which they got money. And so came by is now its own verb. And by here is a participle rather than a preposition. Some more examples would be, she turned up the street. Up the street is, you're explaining the location in which the action is happening. So where did she turn? She turned up the street. So it's a preposition. Whereas she turned up her nose, or like they turned up at the school dance, would both be instances where turned up is a participle because it's just turned up is its own verb and it's taken on its own colloquial meaning, right? Then a final example would be Tom lived down the street. So when you say down the street, you're referring to saying like, oh, he lived down the street. He lived, and then you're assigning a location to the action. He lives down the street. It's over there. So it's a physical location. Whereas saying we finally lived down that incident, you can say you can live something down when like an embarrassing thing happens and you get over it. That's an example where lived down is its own verb, and down is now a participle rather than a preposition. So this makes sense. This really only happens in cases where there's sort of like an informal meaning to a verb, or a verb has a meaning that's alternate to like what the verb on its own means. So right, like to live is different from to live down something, whereas like to turn is different from to turn up your nose, or to come by your fortune, or to, what was the example up here, or to hold up a bank, right? All of those are cases in which the verb is specific and the word being added is a participle rather than a preposition. So does this may just be super confusing, but does this tentatively make sense to people? Okay, cool. Participles explain where, why, when, or how something is happening in a sentence. They assign a temporal relationship to a verb. If you remember anything, remember that. Not super, super crucial, but you might see something on an English test or on your SATs or an AP Lang or literature in high school that ask about participles, and it's good to just keep in the back of your head. So just remember a couple, and if you need a list to reference, look back at the PowerPoint. So we're going to take our break now before we start talking about relevancy statements and conclusions. So let's take a break now and be back by 8:15 to get started with the second half of class. And what might you put in the last sentence of your conclusion? Well, in simple terms, a relevancy or relevant statement is just why the topic of your essay matters necessarily. Like the way your conclusion is typically broken down is you restate your thesis, you then add on, the nuance that you've added through your body paragraphs. Maybe you summarize your evidence really briefly, and then you get to the point where like your essay could logically end. But a really strong essay will usually have some sort of appeal to why the topic matters. Why does it matter that we understand how Tennessee Williams alludes to the American dream and whether or not that's accurate? Why does it matter how, whatever the topic of the essay is, what is sort of the real world implication? Or if that's too difficult, maybe what is at least the impact on readers of understanding this, whatever the topic of your essay is? So this may be a little bit confusing, but I think it will make more sense with examples. But yeah, very briefly, it's essentially an addition to the conclusion which justifies to the reader that an essay's argument is important, meaningful, and relevant. So this is particularly useful when you're writing essays for a lot of standardized tests in high school, like when you have to write your SAT essay, or you also might take different standardized tests, or like the AP Lang or AP Literature essays. Graders really love seeing these relevancy statements, and they generally do make your conclusions stronger. So I'll give you an example. This is sort of a higher level example that you wouldn't necessarily need. And there's no format to a relevancy statement. There's no perfect form. It's much more just like qualitative. So this is a good relevancy statement, but there could always be better ones too. So if my thesis is, in the Hunger Games, author Suzanne Collins uses a dystopian future to illustrate modern America's class inequality and the sensationalization of violence. First, does anyone know what sensationalization means? What does that mean? Well, if something is a sensation, it means that it's like famous, that it captures a lot of attention or spectacle, that it's entertaining. And so the sensationalization of violence refers to the ways in which we view violence as entertaining. A lot of media features a lot of like violence. And we would say that that's like sensationalized. It's shown to be entertaining or spectacle in a way that maybe deprives this topic of like the seriousness that it deserves. And so I don't know, has anyone read the book The Hunger Games? Right, most people have read it. So obviously in that book, the way in which like the Hunger Games are shown on TV and that people are encouraged to like actively participate by like funding their favorite tributes or like donating to their favorite tributes and are like consuming this real life, violent entertainment as spectacle or as entertainment is an example of the sensationalization of violence. So a relevant statement could read something like the following. The role which violence and class inequality plays in the Hunger Games prompts readers to critically reflect on their own consumption of violence through media, including the violence throughout the novel. As a result, Collins's work encourages metatextual analysis and critical reflection among young readers and urges readers to reject sensationalized violence in their own lives. Okay, cool. So as you can see, we haven't necessarily talked about like the impacts on society, but we've certainly talked about like why our topic matters for readers. We're saying that young readers are going to read The Hunger Games. They're going to see the way in which like Suzanne Collins talks about the sensationalization of violence. They'll be prompted to think about the violence that they consume in media and to critically reflect on whether or not that's good or bad. So we're saying for that reason, it's important to talk about our thesis. Does this make sense? There are a lot of ways to do this, and this is only one of them. You could also talk about how the author's purpose is to show that inequality can lead to civil unrest and uprising, and this has a lot of implications for modern day in which we see huge protests against class inequality. So it's important to acknowledge that the book is a cautionary tale, and the events in which the book is talking about have real world implications on people. That's also a relevancy statement that's totally fine. Like I said, there's no perfect way to do this. There's no silver bullet. It's just a lot of like qualitative work, and you'll get a feel for it. Everyone writes their relevancy statements differently, but there are certainly stronger and also less strong ways to do it. So to get some practice, well, first, do we have any questions? Is this like truthfully super unclear to anyone, or do we generally understand what we're talking about here? It's a so what added to your conclusion. It's like, okay, this is what my essay is saying. So what? What's the implication? Why does it matter? So what we're going to do next is I'm going to have everyone practice for the next 5 or 6 minutes adding a relevant statement to the conclusion of your essay from the previous week about the glass menagerie, and be prepared to share that relevant statement with the class. So I'll give you guys 5 or 6 minutes. We'll come back at like 8:27 or 8:28 and be prepared to share. And if you have questions, put them in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask them. All right, I will see you guys after those few minutes. be finishing up because we only have another minute or so. Okay, that's been your 5 minutes, slightly more than 5 minutes. So if we can get our cameras on, that would be great. We're going to go around and share each student's relevance statement. So do I have any brave volunteers who want to go first? Like I said, there's no perfect way to write one of these, so don't worry too much. Does anyone want to share what they've written to start us off? Otherwise, I will select a student at random. Let's go with Eric. Do you want to start us off?
I wrote that Williams' play included struggles of family finance, while in the Great Depression, most families also had struggles with finance. These two both relate to each other due to economic downfall.
Okay, I think this is good. This is a good place to start. What we need is a little bit more about the importance to readers. So maybe something about like Williams' portrayal of a fictional family struggling through the Great Depression is emblematic of the real experiences of many families during that time, which informs modern day economic inequality and is therefore important to understand. And so readers are given a sense of modern economic inequality through the book or something like that. But I think this is really close. This is nearly dead on. So great job, Eric. Thank you so much for leading the charge. All right, Constance, do you want to go next?
Williams' allusion to the American dream using the economic failure of the 1930s pushes readers to realize how important adapting to reality is. The author emphasizes the consequences of living in a separate illusionary world with a weak grasp of reality.
Awesome, that's great. So yeah, you've talked about the impact that it has on readers and why that matters. What is Williams prompting readers to do? And it's to consider, the limitations of their situation and to not live in fictional realities. Yeah, that's a great relevant statement. Really strong. All right, let's go to Darren. Do you want to go next?
I wrote that the economic struggles that Williams portrays shows that our world depends on the money that we have, and this encourages the readers to work hard so that we won't have to be placed in the same economic state that Amanda's family was in.
Yeah, sure. So we could argue that the book is a cautionary tale, that maybe Williams's goal is to inform readers so they don't fall into the same traps of the family, the Wingfields. If you're a parent, you shouldn't try and live out your dreams or aspirations through your kids, and maybe it offers some sort of lesson for families. I certainly would buy that. Great. Awesome, Darren. Okay, that's a good relevancy statement. Tiger, do you have one?
I didn't really finish because I had problems I had to help my mom do something.
Okay, cool. If you want to work on it while we go through other people's and then just send it to me when you're done, that'd be great. Okay, Andrew, do you want to go next?
Just to make sure, a relevancy statement is how many sentences?
Give me 1 to 2 generally. It doesn't have to be super long.
Okay. My relevancy statement is a little short. The unjust system of capitalism that has been suppressing most of the poor has lasted for a century and has to be stopped.
Okay, I like that. I like that as a call to action. I think you just need to mention Williams at some point. So Williams's novel shows that capitalism is an unjust system that needs to be stopped. That's certainly a more radical interpretation than I think most people would have of this play, but why not? Go for it. That's a good statement. You just need to make sure that you emphasize Williams, like that you're talking about the play here, not just urging revolution. So yeah, great. Thank you, Andrew. All right, Isabella C, if you would go next, that would be great.
In conclusion, Williams' reference to the American dream does not match accurately. Unlike the true meaning of the American dream, the play shows an unhappy lifestyle, conflict between characters, and unachieved desires. This encourages readers to achieve the American dream in order to avoid living a life similar to Williams' play.
Yeah, great. So you've talked about the impact that it has on readers, which is really strong. That sounds good, Isabella. Perry, do you want to go next? All right, Perry, in that case, Lucian, if you would go next, that'd be great.
My doctor came, so I didn't finish.
You're muted. You're muted.
Still muted.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. I said, don't worry about it, Lucian. No worries. Yeah, hopefully this gave you guys a sense of just like how to go about writing a relevancy statement. And like I said, there's no magic way to go about this. Ultimately, it's up to the writer to figure out the way in which you want to explain the relevancy of a particular work. But it's important to include because it makes your essay a lot stronger. Great. All right. So I'm happy. It seems like everyone's gotten at least a good understanding of how a relevancy statement works, and we'll be able to use them in future essays going forward. Sorry, one sec. I just need to answer this. Sorry about that. Emergency with a roommate. Okay, great. So what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about our book for next week, because we're done with the Glass Menagerie and we're going to move on to talking about our next story, which is Akita Witch. And I think I asked at the beginning if anyone had read this book. Is anyone familiar with this story already or no? My guess is probably not. This is not as famous as a lot of other books that we're going to read for class. But either way, I think it's useful to give you guys just an initial summary or like a description of the book so you know what to expect. So we're going to read through this little description and that will hopefully help you guys understand the story. So Nigerian-American author Nnedi Okorafor's young adult fantasy novel, Akita Witch, tells the story of Sunny Nwazu, an American-born Nigerian girl with albinism who learns that she is part of a magical community. So first, what is albinism? Are people familiar? What does it mean to be albino? Does anyone know? So basically, like biologically, melanin is the hormone that gives your skin its pigment. So it's how light or dark your skin is. If you're albino, it means, or if you have albinism, it means that you never develop any melanin, meaning your skin is very, very pale. It doesn't have any impact on your health outside of the fact that like you sunburn more easily than other people. Like it's a very sort of harmless mutation that somebody can have. All that it means is that you look different. And so we're going to talk about the way in which our main character having albinism, influences her sort of social life and the way that other people treat her throughout the story. But just know that like it's not a disease or condition. It's just an appearance difference that some people have where you don't look like your family because they all have a darker pigment than you do. Okay. And so the other thing that's important to note is the title comes from an insult that Sunny's classmates call her. And the word Akita is a derogatory term for an American-born Black person in some West African languages. So in places like Nigeria, this is a word that's used derogatorily, meaning offensively, for someone who was born in America and then moved there later in life. And although Okorafor's original title is an intentional effort to reclaim the term and confront the bias behind it, the book is sold under the alternative title of What Sunny Saw in the Flames in some countries, including Nigeria and the United Kingdom. So let's stop there and talk a little bit about what does it mean for like a word to be reclaimed? What is the author trying to do to this offensive word by making it the like very blatant title of the novel? Well, this is maybe a harder question, but I think it'll become clear as we read. The idea of like reclaiming a word is basically the idea that an author is going to use something that is typically considered offensive, but use it to discuss a kind of person who would be insulted using that word in a positive light. So although our main character is born in America and then moves to Nigeria, obviously she is still, a good, smart, interesting, inquisitive person. She just stands out from other people and is therefore called this word as an insult. But it's important to acknowledge like that the word has like a derogatory and offensive meaning, and that in Nigeria, where that word has a lot of cultural relevance, the title is actually changed because it's considered offensive. In America, since we don't really, the idea of insulting someone because they're born in America but then moved to West Africa doesn't really make sense to us. So the word, as a result, it doesn't read in an offensive way to maybe you or I because we sort of lack the cultural understanding. But it's useful to know that that cultural understanding is there, and that there's like that some versions of the book edit out the word from the title by changing the title to something else. So that's useful to know. Okay, and then also, even though this is a work of fiction, you guys want to think about sort of the real life implications. Like our main character is going to find that they're a part of a magical community. But before then, there's a real discussion of like, what is the experience of American-born people in Nigeria? What is it like to be living in Nigeria in 2011? All of these are going to be questions that you want to keep in mind, and that the book will convey a lot of real information about, despite being a work of fiction. So that's something to consider. And then finally, thinking about symbolism, we know that our main character is different from most of the people at their school, right? Because of how they look and where they were born and their background. And that's going to play a large role in sort of how they're treated. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of individuality and uniqueness and the importance of individuality, whether or not it's a virtue, cases in which maybe individuality is actually bad. So keep in mind as we read, you want to be thinking about Sunny and then also the other character Orlu's unique traits, and also what Okorafor's perspective is on uniqueness or individuality. So that's what you should be considering as we read through. And we're going to read the first chapter of the story together as a class, and then we'll discuss, if we have time, the role in which individuality plays in that story. Okay, so let me pull up the book. All right, so the way we're going to do this is popcorn reading like we've done before. Feel free to read, 2 or 3 paragraphs. These paragraphs are short, so you can even read more if you want, and then call on another student to take over. All right, so we're going to start with the prologue, the candle. I've always been fascinated by candles. Looking into the flame calms me down. Here in Nigeria, PHC is always taking the lights, so I keep candles in my room just in case. PHC stands for Power Holding Company of Nigeria, but most people say it really stands for Please Hold Candles in Nigeria. Back in Chicago, we had ComEd and the electricity was always working. Not here though, not yet. Maybe in the future. One night after the power went out, I lit a candle as usual. Then, also as usual, I got down on the floor and just gazed at its flame. The candle was white and thick, like the ones in church. I lay on my belly and stared into it. So orange, like the abdomen of a firefly. It was nice and soothing until it started flickering. Then I thought I saw something serious and big and scary. I moved closer. The candle just flickered like any other flame. I moved even closer until the flame was an inch from my eyes. I could see something. I moved closer still and was almost there. I was just starting to understand what I saw when the flame kissed something above my head. Then the smell hit me and the room was suddenly burning bright yellow orange. My hair was on fire. All right, popcorn, Isabella C.
I screamed and smacked my head as hard as I could. My burning hair singed my hand. The next thing I knew, my mother was there. She tore off her wrapper and threw it over my head. The electricity suddenly came back on. My brothers ran in, then my father. The room smelled awful. My hair was half gone, and my hands were tender. That night, my mother cut my hair. 70% of my lovely hair gone, long gone. Raging fires, boiling oceans, toppled skyscrapers, ruptured land, dead and dying people. It was horrible, and it was coming. Popcorn, Darren.
My name is Sunny Noazu, and I confuse people. I have 2 older brothers like my parents. My brothers were both born here in Nigeria. Then my family moved to America, where I was born in the city of New York. When I was 9, we returned to Nigeria near the town of Aba. My parents felt it would be a better place to raise my brothers and me, at least that's what my mom says. We're Igbo, but that's an ethnic group from Nigeria, so I'm American and Igbo, but I guess. You see why I confuse people? I'm Nigerian by blood, American by birth, and Nigerian again because I live here. I have West African features, like my mother, but while the rest of my family is dark brown, I've got light yellow hair, skin the color of sour milk, or so stupid people like to tell me, and hazel eyes that look like God ran out of the right color. I'm albino. Popcorn Andrew.
Oh, being albino made the sun my enemy. My skin burned so easily that I felt nearly flammable. That's why, though I was really good at soccer, I couldn't join the boys when they played after school. Although they wouldn't have let me anyway, me being a girl, very narrow-minded. I had to play at night with my brothers when they felt like it. Of course, this was all before the afternoon with Chi-Chi and Orlu, when everything changed. I look back now and see that there were signs of what was to come. When I was 2, I almost died from a bad case of malaria. I remember it. My brothers used to tell me that I was a freak because I could remember so far back. I was really hot, absolutely burning up with fever. My mother stood over my bed crying. I don't remember my father being there much. My brothers would come in once in a while and pat my forehead or kiss my cheeks. Popcorn Tiger.
I was like that for days. Then a light came to me, like a tiny yellow flame or sun. It was laughing and warm, but a nice kind of warm, like bathwater that has been sitting for a few minutes. Maybe this is why I like candles so much. It flowed just above me for a long time. I think it was watching over me. Sometimes mosquitoes would fly into it and get vaporized. Do I keep reading? You're muted.
Sorry, you can keep going or popcorn to somebody else.
Okay. It must have decided that I wasn't going to die because eventually it went away and it got better. So it's not as if strange things haven't happened to me before. Popcorn, Lucian.
I knew I looked like a dog, all pale skin, and I was good at being good eyes. When I was longer, my father was in the main room, drinking his beer and reading his paper. I sneaking. I could move like a mosquito when I wanted. Not the American ones that buzz in your ear, the Nigerian ones that are silent like the dead. I creep up on my father, then lie beside him and wait. It was amazing how he wouldn't see me. I'd just stand there grinning and waiting. When he'd glance to the side and see me and nearly jumped to the ceiling. Stupid, stupid girl, he hissed because I really scared him. And because he wanted to hurt me, because he knew that I knew he was scared. Sometimes I hated my father. Sometimes I felt he hated me too. I couldn't help that. I wouldn't um, the son he wanted or the pretty daughter he had accepted instead. But I couldn't not see what I saw in that candle, and I couldn't help what I eventually became. Popcorn
Okay.
to
Thanks so much,
Carrie.
Tiger. Thanks so much, Tiger. So when you guys go back and read, make sure to read this bit about the term leopard person, but we're going to stop here briefly and talk about the prologue and what we learned about our main character. So first, what are some ways in which our main character is unique? Why do they stand out and why are they different? There are a lot. Andrew.
She has albinism. She's Nigerian and American. I can't think of any.
Yeah, exactly. So those are two big ones, right? Which is first, physically on the outside, our character stands out from the rest of the people that she's around. She looks different. And then also she has a different background because everyone else in her family was born in Nigeria, but she was born in America and then moved to Nigeria when she was 9. Eric, anything else?
She had malaria and has pretty good memory because she could remember.
Yeah, so she also was very sick as a kid. And this is discussed in the context of strange things happening to her. So we know that she experiences a lot of strange things. And also she sees like some vision of some really awful like future happening in the fire. So we also get that like externally our character has a strange, backstory, a strange or, a unique appearance, but also has like a unique perspective and unique things going on internally as well. So that's important too. There are like a lot of different ways in which our character is different. And then what do we learn about sort of the differences between America and Nigeria at this time? What are cultural differences that we learn from the story? Well, first thing about the discussion of candles. So there's actually this discussion of how there isn't light available or like electric light available at night for most of Nigeria. And that's not the case, obviously, for America. Everywhere in America, you have electricity 24/7, unless you lose power for some reason. But in Nigeria, that's very much not the case. She also discussed how American mosquitoes buzz in your ear, but Nigerian ones are silent and deadly. And this is interesting because we know our main character had malaria. And does anyone know how malaria is spread? Well, malaria is a disease that's spread by mosquitoes. Actually, interestingly enough, I'm in a class about this year, and I didn't know this, but mosquitoes kill more people than people every year by a large amount. Mosquitoes are actually the #1 cause of death for most people through illnesses like malaria, which are really prominent throughout a lot of the developing world, including Africa. And so in Nigeria, mosquitoes are a lot bigger of a deal. Whereas here you might think, oh, a mosquito, like that's annoying. But in a lot of parts of the world, mosquitoes actually carry like life-threatening diseases. So that's another sort of difference to note. And then finally, how does our character sort of portray herself or maybe her albinism? How does she feel about the fact that she looks different from everyone else? I'm going to actually go back to one of the earlier pages. So I think this bit here is pretty indicative. I've got light yellow hair, skin the color of sour milk, or so stupid people like to tell me, and hazel eyes that look like God ran out of the right color. What does that sort of imply how she feels about being albino? Eric.
She doesn't like how she looks.
Yeah, not particularly good, right? Our character feels sort of insecure or unhappy with how they appear. You wouldn't say God ran out of the right color if you liked the color of your eyes, right? Okay, so now we're going to read the first chapter, or at least some of it, and also consider how the point of view is changing. The prologue is written in what tense or what perspective? Well, first person, right? The rest of the story is not written in first person, so keep that in mind and consider how that changes what you understand. Okay, so I'm going to start us again. Chapter 1, Orlu. The moment Sunny walked into the schoolyard, people started pointing. Girls started snickering too, including the girls she usually hung out with, her so-called friends. Idiots, Sunny thought. Nevertheless, could she really blame any of them? Her woolly blonde hair, whose length so many had envied, was gone. Now she had a puffy, medium-length afro. She cut her eyes at her friends and sucked her teeth loudly. She felt like punching them each in the mouth. What happened? Chulu asked. She didn't even have the courtesy to keep the stupid grin off her face. I needed a change, Sunny said, and walked away. Behind them, she still heard them laughing, or behind her, she still heard them laughing. Now she's really ugly, she heard Chulu say. She should wear some bigger earrings or something, Buchu added. Sunny's ex-friends laughed even harder. If you only knew that your days were numbered, she thought. She shivered, pushing away the images of what she'd seen in the candle. Her day grew worse when the literature and writing teacher handed back the latest class assignment. The instructions were to write an essay about a relative. Sunny had written about her arrogant older brother, Chukwu, who believed that he was God's gift to women, though he wasn't. Of course, it didn't help that his name meant supreme being. Sunny's essay received the highest mark, Miss Tate announced, ignoring the class's sneers and scoffs. Not only was it nicely written, but it was engaging and humorous. Sunny bit the inside of her cheek and gave a feeble smile. She hadn't meant the essay to be funny at all. She'd been serious. Her brother was truly an arrogant nyash. To make things worse, her classmates had all scored terribly. Out of 10, most received 3s or 4s. All right, Darren, do you want to pick up from here?
It's a waste of time trying to teach you all proper English, Miss Tate shouted. She snatched the boy's essay and read it out aloud. My sister always begged, though she make good money. She likes to have but not give. She no go change. Miss Tate slammed the essay back onto the boy's desk. Do you come here just to stare into space? Eh? And you're also timid in what you wrote. Who wants to hear my mother is very nice or my auntie is poor? And in rotten English at that. This is why I had you write about a relative. It's supposed to be easy. As she spoke, she stomped and clomped about the classroom, her face growing redder and redder. She stepped in front of Sunny's desk. Stand, please. Sunny looked around at her classmates. Everyone just stared back at her with slack faces and angry eyes. Slowly, she stood up and straightened her navy blue uniform skirt. Miss Tate left her standing as she went to her desk in front of the class. She opened a drawer and brought out her yellow wooden switch. Sunny's mouth dropped open. I'm about to be flogged. She thought, what did I do? She wondered if it was because she was 12, the youngest in the class. Come, Miss Tate said. But now, she said more firmly. Sunny slowly walked to the front of the class, aware of her classmates' eyes boring into her back. She let out a shallow breath as she stood before the teacher. Popcorn, Eric.
Sunny slowly walked to the front of the class, aware or not of her classmates' eyes boring into her back. She let out a shallow breath as she stood before her teacher. Hold out your hand. Miss Tate, who already bloated with anger, had the switch ready. Sunny shut her eyes and braced herself for the stinging pain, but no sting came. Instead, she felt the switch placed in her hand. She quickly opened her eyes. Miss Tate looked to the class. Each of you will come up and Sunny will give you 3 strikes on the left hand. She smiled wryly. Maybe she can beat some of her sense into you. Sunny's stomach sank as her classmates lined up before her. They all looked so angry, and not the red kind of anger that burns out quickly, but the black kind, the kind that is carried outside of class. Popcorn to Tiger.
Or Earl was the first in line. He was the closest to her age, just a year older. They had never spoken much, but he seemed nice. He liked to build things. She's seen him during lunch hour. His friends would be labeling away, and he'd be to the side making towers and what looked like little people out of a Coca-Cola and Fanta caps and candy wrappers. He certainly didn't want to bruise up his hands. He stood there just looking at her, waiting. He didn't seem angry, just like everyone else. But he looked nervous. If he hadn't spoken, Miss Tate would have boxed his head. Popcorn. Darren.
By this time, Sunny was crying. She felt a flare of hatred for Miss Tate, who up to this day had been her favorite teacher. The woman's lost her mind, she thought miserably. Maybe I should smack her instead. Sunny stood there carrying on the way she knew her mother hated her to do. It was pathetic and childish. She knew her pale face was flushed red. She sobbed hard and then threw the switch on the floor. This made Miss Tate even angrier. She pushed Sunny aside. Sit, Miss Tate shouted. Sunny covered her face with her hands, but she cringed with each slap of the switch. And then the person would hiss or squeak or gasp or whatever suited his or her pain. She could hear the desks around her filling up as people were punched and sat down. Someone behind her kicked her chair and hissed, "You stupid pale-faced Akita witch, your hours are numbered." Popcorn Constance.
Sunny shut her eyes tight and gulped down a sob. She hated the word Akita. It meant bush animal and was used to refer to Black Americans or foreign-born blacks. A very, very rude word. Plus, Sunny knew the girl's voice.
Okay, so we're going to stop there because we only have 3 minutes left and we can't go on. But First, what tense or what point of view is this chapter written in as opposed to the prologue? It's not first person anymore. It is instead what? Andrew.
Third person. I don't think it's omniscient.
Yeah, it's third person limited. So even though we're in third person, we're following Sunny specifically. And as a result, we are able to hear about her sort of thoughts and feelings, but also there's room for the narrator to tell us things happening outside of just Sunny. And we learn a couple things about this school, right? So schooling in this part of Nigeria is very different than what it is in America. Sunny is obviously a much stronger student in English than a lot of her peers. And this is because for her first 9 years, she grew up in America and obviously is just like a better writer than they are. But also it's a school in which many students of many different ages are learning in the same classroom. And also things like, corporal punishment, you can be slapped in the hand, is still like a protocol that the school uses. So understanding just sort of like the cultural context and framing of the book is important. And even though we're going to get into in the realm of just like magic at some point, a lot of the information that you have about the experience of people living in a different place is still very true. And that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so we only have 1 minute left. I wish we could talk more about the book, but I want to give you guys your homework so that you're able to enjoy the rest of your weekend. So for the next week, you are going to read through chapter 9 of Akita Witch and write an essay plan analyzing one of the book's main themes or symbols. So an essay plan is going to be similar to last week, where you need a thesis, you need 3 topic sentences, and you need some amount of text evidence that you're going to be using to prove each of those topic sentences. Remember our discussion of theme. Theme shouldn't just be a word. It should be what an author is saying about a particular topic. Or if you choose to write about symbols, you need to make sure that you're writing about what those symbols mean, not just like what a symbol being used in the book is. So, right, you don't want to just write about the author uses candles as a symbol. You want to say like the author uses candles to symbolize and then something more specific. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? If so, you're free to go. Enjoy your weekend. If not, stick around if you have questions. See you all next week.